You know, we got to thank Dollar Moore and her foundation. And we are part of the Lake City Creative Alliance. I'd like to thank the Ron McNair Life Center for having us here. Dale Smith and Zach. Zach's on staff now, so you can go look at him and all you want. And of course, y'all. You know, we wouldn't have it unless y'all came. Okay? This is Sam's last time he's going to aggravate me about Lake City. We're going to be talking about 1932, 1933 tonight. The census of Lake City in 1930 was little less than 2,000 people. In 1938, they estimated it was 2,500, and the suburban area be 1,000. Now, the suburban area is a half a mile from the depot. So if you ventured out a half a mile, you will be on the outer limits of Lake City. Moving. Now, my question to y'all, after we get out the Depression, did we actually have a Depression in Lake City? Okay? I may prove you right, may prove you wrong about a Depression in Lake City. But I'm not going to say yes we did or yes we're not. Or yes we did. Moving week. January the 1st, 1932. We had a dry goods store that moved to Sumter. We had Collins Department Store. Now, where was Collins Department Store when we were growing up? All right, it was right beside table 118, we call it, okay? But this was where Mr. M.A. Tommy had his leader store. And that was at Eagle's Dime Store, okay? Also, Ruffin's 5 and 10 cent store moved. A.B. Brick, which was a Jew in town, also moved. And Ward Brothers Tire. Now, this is Kelly Block, and it wrapped around the bank, the Palmetto Bank, at one time. H. Van Epps' store was where Pirates T-shirt is today. So they were moving. Now, it costs money to move, right? Wouldn't you say that? Yes, ma'am.
Go back to that frame. Is that a cotton gin on the right side in the background?
The what now?
What kind of building is that in the background?
Oh, right here?
Yes.
That's the Ritz Theater.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay, looks like it's open.
Okay, that's the Ritz Theater. And do ask questions. S.J. Tomlinson and Son also was on Main Street. A.J. Ham from Atlanta was the general manager, and they had other stores in the state, in Atlanta, Lynchburg, Florence, Sumter. The Ward brothers moved his business on Main Street with a grocery business. So both buildings here and here were occupied by the Ward brothers. Now, who might the Ward brothers be? The Zeke Ward's family, okay? And W.L. Price and Company occupied Mr. Harry Whitlock's grandfather's building, which is Hicks and Gary, okay? Give you a few minutes to look at. New stores. Seemed like 1932 we had new stores moving. And this is just saying that the college department store occupied M.A. Tommy's new leader. And then we had on Saul Street the Black Cafe and Barbershop. It was burned before the fire was under control. W.T. Askins, one of the old pioneers of Lake City, dies. He was 72 years old. Been in business and farming, mercantile business for 50 years. It's amazing. Now, some of you probably recognize some of his heirs. Mr. Talmadge Askins, Miss Emily Askins, Mr. Allen Askins from Gaffney, Laurie and Robbie, and Mr. Raymond Askins, which was Sharon Askins' father-in-law. Am I right, Sharon? This is Mr. W.T.
I think that's correct.
Okay. Opened a new store, R.T. Whitehead. Now, R.T. Whitehead, during our coming up, ran a store, where was it? Corner Drug, okay? But he had a dry goods store at first, right near the Cash Hardware store, which was beside Daniel's Hardware store, which was table 118 and 116. And Mr. R.B. Cromer, old Dad Cromer's daddy, okay, ran for superintendent of Florence School. He was a mail carrier during our time. And his platform is going to be known later on, so he didn't make it. Mount Croghan was near Paisland with a population of 166. So it was a small, very small community at the time. The People's Bank of South Carolina. The People's Bank took over the Planters Bank and the Citizens Bank in 1930. 2 years later, the People's Bank of South Carolina failed. So we had, say, 3 banks that failed during the early part of the Depression. The Lake City Depository. Lake City Depository started with $2,500 with W.A. McClam, J.P. Matthews, J.R. Matthews as the principal owners of the bank. The first day, they took in $1,100. $11,000, excuse me. And it was the first bank since the first of the year. And they used the Planters Bank, and I suspect that would have been down, am I right, Claire? Okay. We've been debating about who was where in Lake City during this period of time. So the Planters Bank would be where Strickland Jewelers. And the Lake City Depository became the Lake City State Bank.
So that single building where AWS is now is where the Planters Bank was?
And also there was another bank down the street where the Palmetto branch was. That was the Citizens Bank that Mr. Moot Truelock started, but he died before it actually opened up. Isn't that right, Woody? Okay. New quarters, the A&P, the Atlantic Coastline, the Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. If you can look like it, it says that. A&P. Y'all do know where this building is. Okay. It was the Glamour Corner, which is Fairlane Finance today. Okay. Heinz Cash, groceries. He wouldn't accept credit. It was all cash. It was occupied on Main Street. C.A. Timmons, who is C.A. Timmons? Dr. Timmons' father. Dr. Thad Timmons' father was C.A. Charles A. Timmons. And he had 2 stores. And guess what came out of Timmons' grocery store? The IGA. Right. And the present location of that store was the Dollamore Foundation, the old history store. The Big Brick Warehouse. It was burned in November 1931. It was up and running for the tobacco season in 1932. And it actually covered the whole block of Saul Street. If you'll notice, this is Saul Street. Saul Street. It says it occupied the entire block from Church between Dancing and Saul Street.
I remember that building used to have an inset in it that got 3 stores in that down next to Coastline. Second time it burned, those 3 stores survived.
Right, it was burned in 1955, and then they moved it out to Highway 52. A gas station next door to the Ford place. Hyman Motor Company, which is where the Lake City Electric Motor Company is. Okay, right next to it. Mr. L.C. Hyman was a Ford dealer before he was a Chevrolet dealer. A park for Lake City being constructed on the Pine Grove across from the high school on Main Street and Williamsburg Avenue. Most attractive spot in Lake City. Had swings, sliding boards, seesaws, benches, a fish pond.
When was that done away with?
1930, this is 1932. Mr. Hyman bought the property in 1935 and built his house. And we bought his house, we meaning Kent and Carol Daniels. 3 years. But we could say we had a park in Lake City for 3 years. All right, here's the question about the Depression. Chickens. Chickens was a big deal in town in the 1930s. They shipped 500 pounds of chickens at 12 cents a pound. Doesn't seem like a lot. That's 250 chickens shipped on July 13th. At around 1400, Democratic voters to register. What about the Republican Party? There wasn't much of the Republican Party in the 1930s in Lake City. Most of them voted Yellow Dog Democrat. Weaver Drug Store had 705. Deputy Askins and Son registered 644. Now, who were they going to vote for? We had 3. Mr. Jack Dazale, John Daniels, that's John Daniels of Camp Branch, J.F. Rittenbaker, which is a relative of Miss Margaret Rittenbaker. No, I think that'd be his great uncle. Lyon Carter, A.M. Parker, Miss Julia Parker's husband, L.E. Diggs, Mr. Ed Diggs, C.A. Timmons, and A.J. Thorpe. Now, you can figure out what war they were in. Ward 1 was over toward Lions Park. A.M. Parker was, I think, over at Beauregard in that area. Ed Diggs was around about where Bland Street School was. And C.A. Timmons was right here in town. Okay. The bean market. $200,000. That's a lot of money. It's an equivalent to $3,400,000 in one season. 294 carloads of snap beans. Green beans, 102. Lima beans, 66 carloads. Now, carloads, y'all, are box carloads. Okay. Cucumbers, 128 carloads. So we were shipping out a bunch of produce. And the farmers were making money. Okay? 500,000 crates were used. And most of the crates were, if I'm not mistaken, Carter Manufacturing produced them. 3,400,000 in one season.
Yeah. How long was the season?
It ran from April to June. And then the tobacco came in August and November. People, the ladies of the community started canning and showing people how to can. That 4-H girls were demonstrating. Each woman in the club, in the canning club, would help 10 women. If you needed seed and you couldn't afford seed, seed was provided. If you didn't have the jars to can your so-called surplus, jars were given to you. The black women were included. And they were pledged to help the other black women in the community. Mr. Lyde Truelock died as Woody's great uncle. He became mayor and couldn't fulfill his term of office. He had one daughter named Inez Truelock Ripley. Okay? That ring a bell. Okay. R.B. Cromer, old Dad's daddy, pops up again. He was an educated man. I wish I had his credentials. Graduated from Newberry, went to the University of Wisconsin and the University of Virginia. And he was invited to be a speaker for FDR and John Gardner for the presidency. And this is his first, FDR's first term. And he toured the western part of North Carolina during the month of October. $2 million pounds of tobacco in one day, in 1 week, in 1 week. At 15 cents. I calculated 15 cents in 1932 to be $2.58. And if you multiply that by 2 million, you had $5 million Money was flowing in 1932. Did we have a depression? Teachers. Mr. George Hagen, Miss Sadie Hagen's husband, Miss Sarah Rollins, they lived next door to where I am now. Miss Emily Askins, Edgar Whitehead, J. Paul Truelock, Ruby Smith, Hazel Tomlinson, 1932, taught me. She was an old lady, you know? Yeah. This is 1932, though. That's right. Miss Dora Hannon, Miss Jessie Johnson, which is Mr. Leon Johnson's sister. So they knew their material. Football, 1932. Didn't have it. What kind of excuse is this? Lack of finance. When we were selling millions of dollars worth of tobacco. We're going to have track, basketball, and baseball, but no football. The biggest crowd we ever had was 1932, 625 students. The Young Democrats, Edgar Whitehead, Mr. Clarence Holloway, which is Mr. Earl's brother, and Lewis Wallace. I don't know who Lewis Wallace was, but these three were instigated, and they wanted to boot out the police, the day police and the night police. Later on, I'll tell you a little story about the day police and the night police, but that's another chapter. And they were worried about Deep River because Deep River, they were having commotions at Deep River. And that was outside the town limits. Did they get their way? Acting mayor, they wanted 2 more sales to be built. And people had to pay taxes. Mayor Jack Dazale beat John Daniels and Mr. Rittenbaker. L.T. Coward was councilman. A.M. Parker, Ellie Diggs, J.W. Carter, A.J. Thorpe, and Mr. Willie Cook. And you will hear about Mr. Willie Cook later on. He was a card. And Mr. Parker was named Mayor Pro Tem. O.T. Anderson was chief of police, and Mr. James was night police. And W. Carter was Mr. Clinton Carter's father. Joe, I'm not going to leave you out. Lake City opens up a store. Dr. Kelly Floyd from Atlanta opens up his drugstore, His brother was named Roy Floyd, my next door neighbor when I was growing up. And it was named Floyd Drug Company. It operated from 1933 to 1950 when Joe Kinsey and Ed Roper bought Floyd Drug Store and named it Roper Drug Store. And the telephone number was a big 4. Farmers Exchange started in 1933. And it occupied Timmons Grocery Store, which is not at the Dollamore Foundation. It was still on Main Street. Lake City was, this is an article I found in the paper in 1933. World's largest meat market in the world. Already, this is in June of 1933. 150 cars apiece. $1.59 per bushel. And the paper said that the public spirit businessmen of the town. So because of the spirit businessmen of the town and the produce and the tobacco, we were the first to conquer the Depression.
Yeah, we know what happened to tobacco. What happened to the spring bean market?
According to Wesley Floyd, more communities was selling the beans. And the northern buyers, the northern buyers wouldn't buy. Speak up a bit, please, when we catch you.
I said, I heard another little story about the bean market. There's some buyers here, they brought down at Richmond, they ran them out of town now. They have a tale that the market in New York would fall, and the price of beans would go down. And people found out, farmers found out they were pulling the leg. Taking advantage of it.
Okay.
That was one thing that killed the bean market.
Yeah, I remember as a child, when the wagons and pickup cars, trucks, lined all the streets in Lake City, Church Street out past the bridge, when there was a market there. And they would move slowly, I guess, to the beef market. I never followed them, but it was quite something to see.
That was in the,
Plant was, they would go all the way down that Crown Avenue.
Right, out
They got baskets that sit right there in front of our business, filling their beans and things. They got well with the market fell. I watched some of it one time when it fell. The farmers would go there and just take the baskets that they put beans in, dump beans out on Stowell, right down that Crown Avenue.
and that was green beans, string beans, not butter beans. Ken, I thought that the beef market wasn't built till 1936.
it wasn't. It was a platform at the depot. They built a big long platform. In 1933, we have appointments. O.T. Anderson was reelected chief of police. Mr. Johnson was the night police. Mr. Covington was in charge of the streets and the water. Mr. Bain, which is Miss Thelma Bain's father, was in charge of the fire department. Mr. Batten, electrical, and Mr. George Anderson was charge of the Board of Health. Simple. Why couldn't we do that today? Too simple. All right, here we go. At first, we were moving businesses. Now we're moving homes. Mr. Banks moved into Dr. McAfeen's house. Mr. R.L. Coleman moved into the Hannah house on Thomas Street. Through the home of Mr. Baines. Mr. Forrester moved the 1st of February to home of Mr. Coleman. Mr. Newman moved his home to Clyde Trulock. And Mr. Tyler to the Newsom home. Got you confused? Must have been. I thought about that too when I was doing this. Yeah. All right. 1933 is when the systematic way of selling beans started. He had a committee that went to North Carolina and they saw how the produce was moving from one farmer to the other farmer. And they incorporated it into our bean market. And that's why the streets were always full during that time. Mr. M.R. Gravely, that's Miss Lizzie Gravely, Randy Gravely's father, completed a home where his father-in-law lived. Mr. W.L. Price moved on Williamsburg Avenue. Mr. DuPont came from Monk's Corner and built a house on Williamsburg Avenue, and it's still there today. It is the third house after you pass Taylor Street on the left. Mr. Ethel D. Smith began a brick building right across the street next door to Mr. G.L. Sauls, which is on the corner. And Miss Ethel gave it to her niece, Mrs. J.P. Trulock. Now, how would you like to have an advertisement where you would hire a balloonist to jump 3,000 feet in the air in a parachute and then land a mile away? They did that as an advertisement for the new home warehouse.
Was that Sidney Cook's service?
No. That'd be something that Sam would do.
Where'd the balloon go?
Don't know. And then after that, a couple got married. They wanted 6,400 feet up in the air and got married, and they had 13 passengers that witnessed the ceremony. 1933. Carter manufacturers were putting out crates and also putting out caskets. 1933. Which is right there where the loft, the bank loft is today. Brown's Chapel, which is 9 miles away. The Methodist Church started Brown's Chapel in 1925, and then it was brick veneered in 1933. George H. Tommy, 1934, football team. Yeah, we had a football team in 1934. We lost the first two, and then we won. The last 3 games, Lake City scored 122 points, and the opponent 0. Could you see Mr. George Tommy? Some of you don't know Mr. George, but he was about my size. He was a running back. And the other running back was John O'Green, 98 pounds. All right, take a vote. You want to have the next one in August? Raise your hand. Or September. September. All right, it will be August. We got refreshments across the street. And thank y'all for coming.